Hello everyone, welcome to our Meetings Assistance for Jehovah's Witnesses channel. I hope all of you are doing well. In this video, we are going to prepare for the book study, Complete Testimony, for the week of May 5th to 11th. This week, we will study chapter 26, paragraphs 1 to 8. Questions 1 and 2. What kind of journey awaited Paul, and what reasons did he have to be nervous? The journey awaiting Paul was long and full of uncertainty. He was heading to Rome as a prisoner, which contrasted with his previous missionary journeys where he was free. Additionally, he had to stand before Emperor Caesar, which created a great deal of tension. Paul had reasons to be nervous because of the dangers of the journey, including the possibility of suffering another shipwreck, as he had already experienced this in the past. He also faced the uncertainty of being judged by Caesar, which could lead to a death sentence. Additional comments. Paul had faced several shipwrecks in his life, reflecting his direct experience with the constant dangers of the sea during those times. This background gave him legitimate reasons to fear another disaster on his journey to Rome, where the sea voyage was dangerous and long. Paul not only had to face the physical risks of the journey but also the anxiety of being judged by imperial power. As a prisoner, his life was in Caesar's hands, meaning that the trial could have fatal consequences. This situation reflects human frailty in the face of worldly systems of power, represented by Caesar in this context. Question 3. What was Paul completely determined to do, and what will we see in this chapter? Paul was completely determined to fulfill his duty of preaching the kingdom of God's message, regardless of the difficulties he would face in Rome. Despite the uncertainty and danger, he would not become anxious about what he could not control, as he trusted that Jehovah had a purpose for him, even if it meant facing the highest authorities. Additional comments. Despite the challenges that awaited him, Paul did not allow fear to paralyze him but focused on his mission. This reflects deep faith and trust that Jehovah had a purpose for his life, and what might be seen as a challenge, he understood as an opportunity to testify about the kingdom. Paul knew that anxiety about what he couldn't control would only rob him of his joy. This approach shows an important lesson. Trusting in Jehovah and focusing on what can be done, like preaching, is what brings true peace and satisfaction, rather than focusing on future worries and fears. Question 4. What kind of ship did Paul board for his journey, and who accompanied him? Paul began his journey on a merchant ship that had just arrived in Caesarea. This ship, which was not designed for passengers, made several stops to load and unload goods. Paul was not alone on this journey. At least two of his faithful friends accompanied him, Aristarchus and Luke. Additional comments. The type of ship Paul traveled on was not meant for comfort, but for transporting goods. This highlights the harsh conditions under which prisoners traveled at that time, without comforts and facing much more than just the challenges of the voyage. The support of Paul's companions, Aristarchus and Luke, accompanied Paul on this journey, demonstrating the solidarity of brothers in faith. Despite the adverse conditions, These faithful friends stayed with Paul, offering him support and company during his difficult situation. This reflects the importance of unity and mutual support within the Christian community. Question 5. Who did Paul meet in Sidon, and what does this detail teach us? In Sidon, Paul met other Christians, who received him warmly. Despite being a prisoner, Julius, the Roman officer, allowed Paul to go ashore, suggesting that he treated Paul with more respect due to his Roman citizenship and the lack of evidence against him for committing a serious crime. Additional comments. The fact that Julius allowed Paul to meet with the Christians in Sidon shows how the treatment Paul received was influenced by his status as a Roman citizen. This highlights the respect Paul earned, even as a prisoner, because of his citizenship rights and his behavior before the authorities. The hospitality of the Christians in Sidon is an example of how mutual support and solidarity in the Christian community provide encouragement and strength. Despite his circumstances, Paul was able to experience the warmth and affection of his brothers, teaching us the value of hospitality and how this attitude can strengthen the faith of others. Questions 6 to 8. How was the journey from Sidon to Cnidus, and what opportunities should Paul have taken advantage of? The journey from Sidon to Cnidus was difficult due to contrary winds, which complicated navigation. Despite the difficulties, Paul likely took every opportunity to preach to the other prisoners, passengers, soldiers, and crew members, perhaps even in the ports where they made stops. In Myra, they had to change ships and board a much larger one that was transporting wheat to Rome. This change allowed Paul to expand his preaching territory, and he surely took the opportunity to speak about the kingdom message to the new travel companions. The journey to Cnidus was slow and complicated as the weather conditions worsened. The trip, which would normally take a day, was prolonged for several days due to the adverse winds, making the voyage more uncomfortable and desperate for the travelers. Additional comments. Although the journey conditions were difficult, with contrary winds slowing progress, Paul continued to seek opportunities to preach, Acts 27, 4-5. This shows how, even in challenging circumstances, one can take advantage of the moments that arise to share one's faith with others, as Paul did with the prisoners, soldiers, and other travelers. When changing ships in Myra, Paul had the opportunity to preach to a new group of people, likely many more than in the previous ship. This change not only marked a new phase in his journey but also an opportunity to spread the message to a larger group, reflecting how Paul took advantage of every situation to fulfill his mission, regardless of the circumstances. Comments from the box: Navigation and commercial routes. In ancient times, ships were not made to transport people but to carry goods. If someone wanted to travel, they had to find a merchant ship going to their destination, negotiate the price, and wait for it to depart. This shows that traveling by sea was not like it is today, where ships are specifically designed for passengers. Passengers had to sleep on the outside of the ship, in a sort of tent that they set up themselves each night. Additionally, they had to bring their own food and blankets for the journey. This gives us an idea of how uncomfortable travel was in those days, as there were no comforts like we have today. The duration of the trip depended completely on the winds. If the winds were favorable, the journey could be quicker, but if they were not, it could stretch out considerably. This also explains why sailing was avoided between November and March, as bad weather made traveling nearly impossible without risk. Well, these have been the practical answers for this week's congregation book study. I hope they are very helpful to you, my dear brothers and sisters. I send you a big hug, and may Jehovah bless and protect you always.